Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. I want to thank you for anyone who would be watching on YouTube anytime throughout the week. Lovely having you. As always, you'd be welcome to come actually live here at the Home Scar Center, Hope Baptist Church, at the 10:30 on a Sunday. Jesus on adultery, divorce, and other simple subjects. Now, we're gonna sort of quickly set the stage just for a moment and gonna dive right in. You know, church history and church life is full of arguments and disagreements. It's just the way it is. And why is that? It's because it's full of people. And people come with all different sorts of thoughts, all different kind of ideas. And when you take a look at the scripture, it gets, well, this is what I think, and all these kind of things. It becomes a bit of a minefield. And this is one of those topics. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, Eric, you know what? I'm not married, and I'm not even going to go there. So maybe I should just sort of switch off and go to my nice place in my mind. But let me just encourage you that this is an incredibly important topic, and you may be able to be a blessing and a help to somebody who could be struggling in this area. We're going to just look at this on a sort of a high level kind of space into what Jesus says. And come August time, what we're going to do in August is that we're going to have a bit of a hodgepodge as a bit of a kind of a summer series. And we want to take one of the weeks in August and take a look at the whole idea of divorce and remarriage and a bit of a deeper level than what we're going to deal with here, okay? There'll be other things that we'll be doing to kind of pique your interest and have something a bit different, but that is the game plan. Jesus takes the same approach here as he had done previously that we've already looked at. He says, for example, there in Matthew chapter 5, notice what he says. He says, "You have heard it said from those of old." You've heard people say it in time past, but I tell you, and that's the pattern that he gives us. He's dealing with, as we mentioned last week, he's dealing with the idea that the current religious crowd was all about the outside. Remember, we looked briefly in Revelation chapter 3, Jesus dealing with the church in Sardis. Let me just read you that one verse. Chapter 3, verse 1 says this. "And to the angel of the church at Sardis write," listen to what he says, "These things says he who has the 7 stars of God and the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars." Don't worry about that. "But I know your works, and that you have a name, that you are alive, but you are dead." They were posers. They looked good on the outside, but Jesus, who can see on the inside, said, well, you may have a good reputation. You may have a nice Facebook presence. Your website may be spot on, but I know what's happening on the inside. That's the issue that Jesus was dealing with here. So we're going to divide this up into 2 big chunks. The first, we're going to look at that of adultery. That of adultery in just the first few verses. And let us remind ourselves of the verses again. 27. "You've heard it said, do not commit adultery." Okay? Clearly a comment, a quote from what we would call the 10 Commandments. Does anyone remember which commandment that one is? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Know which one it is?
The 8th.
Ooh, not the 8th. Allison, do you remember? Number 7. Okay, number 7. Number 7. You have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And then we'll get to the other bits. First of all, we want to come to a couple of FAQs, facts. You know, you go to the websites and you see frequently asked questions. So let's touch on a couple things really, really quickly. So adultery, what is it? Oh, Eric, of course I know what it is, but let me just come to you on this. It is the breach, the breaking of the one flesh relationship, covenant, we'll come to that in a second, of marriage. Any sexual expression with another. It is the breach, the breaking of the one flesh relationship of marriage. Eric, how does it sing in the Old Testament law? You really want to know that? Are you sure you want to know that? It does incur the death penalty. It is a serious, serious thing within the Old Testament law. What does God compare it to? God compares it to Israel chasing after other gods. He says you committed adultery with other gods, and he uses that illustration again and again and again. It's a very, very serious thing. Now, we've talked before about the whole thing of the importance and how God views the whole thing of the intimate relationship between a husband and a wife. We won't get into all that. But in verse 28, Jesus then raises the bar. Jesus raises the bar. You've heard it said, don't do this, but I tell you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, I'm going to ask for everyone really to tune in, especially the younger folks who are here, who may see one day that day where you would say, I do, in front of a pastor, and then you kiss that person, you promise them that you'll stay with them forever and ever and ever in marital bliss, right? Please tune in. Jesus raises the bar. He says in Mark chapter 7, verse 20, that adultery and sin actually begins not in the actions that we do, but where does it begin? It begins in the heart. Begins in the heart. Jesus wasn't trying to downplay the act itself, but he was trying to get to the core, trying to get to the crux of where the problem really is. Jesus says, whoever looks. Now there's a word there in the Greek, and the word is blepo. Can you say that with me on the count of three? 1, 2, 3. Blepo. It's a simple little word. As a matter of fact, that word occurs all over the place. They see all kinds of things. So whoever looks, whoever sees, it's a very common word. It simply means to look. Now, isn't it true that we look at all kinds of things? Don't you look at all kinds of things every day, right? You get up in the morning, right? Put your feet on the floor, and maybe you toddle over to the loo, and then you look in the mirror. You may like what you see. You may not like what you see. We look at that. We look at the fruit and veg in the shop. We look at the car to see if it needs something, right, Chris? If something's broken, we see if it needs something, right? Hopefully we look at other drivers on the road. Maybe you've created something, maybe you've cleaned something, you step back and say, wow, that looks pretty good. I've done a good job with that. Looking. But it's all about the purpose of looking. Why do you look at that car, Chris? You look to see if something around that car is broken so it's not safe to drive. Why do we look at something that we've cleaned or we've built to make sure that it is clean? Or have we missed something? There's a purpose to the looking. Now there's a word there in the original language that it's difficult to translate, but let me just try to help you with this. When Jesus says that whoever would look at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. He said, whoever looks towards the woman in the direction of her to lust. Now, there's an unneeded word in that sentence that we don't really translate, but the idea is this, is that if the looking towards the woman to lust, the goal being to get her to lust for you. Now, it doesn't really matter because Jesus makes this a big deal. But the point is, you could say, well, it's all the bloke's fault. But wait a minute. I think I do remember hearing that it takes two to tango, right? Is that still true? Yeah. Can you tango on? I've never tangoed before. I don't know how that works. But I think you still need two to tango. So the idea is that if this would happen, that the sin has already been created within the heart is drawn toward that, and maybe you're trying to get that person to come to you with that same goal in mind. It's down to the heart. But then Jesus moves on to something that is pretty intense. What does he say? Now, I think we can all agree with this, okay, right? You may say, Eric, well, but come down to verse 29 and 30. Notice what it says. He says here, he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it's more profitable for you than one of your members perish than for your whole body be cast into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it's more profitable for you than one of your members perish and for your whole body to be cast into hell. Does that seem a bit harsh? That seems a bit harsh to you? Yeah, seems a bit harsh. And you may scratch your head and say, Jesus, are you serious about what you're trying to say here? Now, hold on. Don't get upset with me. Don't get upset with Jesus. Just hang tight, right? Hang tight. We say things in all sorts of ways in order to communicate things. For example, we say something, I've said this a million times, to particularly our little ones at home. Why, if it seems like if it goes in one ear, it comes out the other. Have you said that before? Probably. Yeah, you said that. Is that really the way it happens? Is that real? Does it go in one ear and then pops out the other ear? Really? Well, maybe it seems like it sometimes, but I don't think it really happens. It's just the way we use language. It's the way we use language, the way we say things. It's an idiom. It's a thing that we say in English that may not make sense in another language. I remember I was preaching one of my few times in Croatia when we were there. And I was speaking, and I said something like this, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Okay, which is, I think this is still an English thing that we say, you can't have everything. And the translator was there, and they were translating. Of course, I didn't know what they were saying. And and a bunch of people in the back, the young people, were laughing. I thought, what's so funny about that? So after the service, I went up to the translator. I said, what was so funny? Well, I talked to some of the people as well. He said, well, the translator said, you can't have your goats and your money too. Because that was the equivalent idiom in Croatian. You know, interesting. So it's an idiom. It's a way of expressing something and saying something. How about this? If I've told you once, I've told you twice or 1,000 times. Now, have you actually really sat down with a counter and said, click, click, click? No, there's 627 times click. You know, that's not. It's just a expression. So we call that a hyperbole, something that we say that goes way off to express a point, right? We use that. We say that. That's the way we speak. And I think Jesus is saying the same thing here. He's using these expressions to be able to make a point. Now, if you're to look at church history, there have been people who've come to this particular passage, and they've not looked at it that way. They've actually looked at it in a very literal way. And there have been people who, in order to try and please God, would actually do things like, how can I say, for men, they would perform certain operations in themselves so that they couldn't have children, to try and please the Lord, following this particular passage from Jesus to the nth degree. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? But I don't think Jesus is getting that, but he is trying to make a point. He's emphasizing the importance of being sensitive to that sin of adultery. And he said we need to be willing to do something about it. And notice he says, if your right eye and your right hand. Now, all throughout Scripture, the idea of someone being on the right indicates what? Indicates importance, indicates power, indicates a priority. So Jesus is saying, listen, even if you do something with your right hand or your right eye, listen, it'd be better to get rid of that than deal with the judgment. Jesus is emphasizing the seriousness of this particular sin. Now let's come to another little series of FAQs, right? Another little series of frequently asked questions. Someone may say, okay, how long can I look before it crosses over from mere looking to looking towards lust, right? This is very practical. You're walking down the street. You may say, Eric, well, I never have these kind of thoughts come through my mind. I'm sorry, I don't believe you, particularly for blokes. That's why the vast majority of the pornographic material is directed toward who? Men. Okay? Men are on the whole, very visually orientated. If you're a man here, I think if we were to be honest with each other, we would all agree with that. I'm not saying it's never a problem with a woman, but for men, it is a major, major issue. I found this to be very practically helpful. That if you would catch yourself doing a double take, you know what I mean by double take, right? Yeah. Pray for that woman. Pray for that woman's partner, boyfriend, or husband, and it's amazing how those thoughts will melt away. Amazing. How long can I look before it crosses over into sin? Who's to say? Who's to say? Be careful. Be careful. The imagination can go off into directions that you do not want it to go. Number 2, can I be forgiven? Can I be forgiven? If I was to think thoughts like that Jesus said that we shouldn't. Absolutely. Absolutely. Think of the woman caught in adultery. We looked at that here just recently. The woman caught in adultery, as Jesus was there, the religious crowd was making all kinds of accusations, and then the one who has no sin cast the first rock. You remember all that? Then what did Jesus say to the woman? He said, go and sin no more. Your sins are forgiven. And I'm so thankful for the forgiveness that we have in Christ. Number 3, I mentioned this bit about Job. And now if you're quick and you know where Job is, there's one particular verse I want to show you, and I have a plan in my mind to take some time to look at Job, potentially when we come into the autumn time. But Job is an amazing, amazing character with an incredible story. Job comes and makes a statement here that's full of incredible stuff, sort of in the middle of his book. Job chapter 31, verse 1 says this. Job says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? And the idea is a young woman towards lust, a young woman towards impure thoughts. Job said, I made a covenant with my eyes. We'll come to a covenant in just a second. I've made a contract, I've made a promise with my eyes. What a great picture that is. I have promised myself, I've committed myself that when I was if I was to see something and do a double take, that I'm going to commit that to God and not allow my mind to continue on thinking those thoughts, to not allow myself to, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Which leads me to this. Came across this some time ago. You have on your papers, if you have one of the papers, a little web link. It's a bit of software called Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes. And it's all about a way, because of pornography and the internet is such a dangerous thing that there's this bit of software, this program that's out there that will track where you go. And the idea is you allow your wife, your partner, to have a link that they can see exactly where you go. So there's a level of accountability. Okay? And accountability is good. It's good. That makes you aware that there's someone else, apart from God, who's watching. Because the thing is, as a believer, I want God to be pleased with my life. I want God to be pleased with what I watch, what I look at. Okay? But also the battle is that there is the flesh as well. And the flesh can pull you in directions, and before you know it, what was a brief glance becomes 10 seconds, becomes a minute, becomes an hour. And I've read enough stories and I've known enough people that you would think, oh, that person had a problem. You've got to be kidding. Never presume that someone has totally cracked that. Okay? We all need to be accountable. Be aware. Jesus said, you've heard it in the past, don't commit adultery, but I tell you. But then he comes on to, so there's a little screenshot from that particular website. I encourage you to take a look at that if you want to. But then it comes this issue of marriage, verse 31 and 32. Notice what he says. Chapter 5, verse 31 and 32. We're just going to touch on this briefly because there's so much here. Furthermore, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. There good, ties the two sections together. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Now, don't get confused with all that. We're going to take some time when we come to August and look at that in particular. Okay? Notice what he says here, this thing about marriage. We've got a couple of FAQs as well. What is marriage? What is marriage? The Bible in Malachi says marriage is a covenant. Marriage is a covenant. We've made mention of that before. We'll come to it just a second about talking specifically about a covenant. Malachi chapter 2 says that the Israelites were divorcing their wives and marrying women who were devoted to false gods. That was a problem. And they got to the point of divorcing women just for any willy-nilly purpose. So a marriage is this covenant, a relationship between a man and a woman witnessed by God. When it gets down to its basic form, that is what it is. How is it viewed in the Bible? Well, go back to Genesis chapter 2. God brought Adam, the man, Eve, the woman. He says the two shall be one. Marriage is physical, but is far more than physical. There's the joining together of the flesh, of the spirit, the soul. So it's a coming together, promising God in the presence of God to commit yourself to that other person. The Bible uses a marriage as a relationship between Christ and the church as well. What a beautiful picture that is. And we'll spend some time with that later as we start looking at some areas of end time events. I hear today quite often, Eric, why even bother with this marriage thing? I mean, it's just a piece of paper, right? And I've come across this even just recently. But there's a growing trend in this, and I think basically because we've taken God and we've chucked God into the bin. And so this thing of having a promise before God means nothing anymore. But God established marriage in the Garden of Eden. Marriage is good. But for our young people that are here, please hear me out. Approach it seriously. Approach it thoughtfully. please bring your parents into it. Please. I'll pay you £5 if you would, okay? 20, whatever it is. I'll pay you. Not yet. You've got a few years yet. The point is, bring your parents into this. They have wisdom. You may think, they're old. They don't know anything about modern days. Listen, they know. They've been there. They have wisdom that you know nothing of. Okay? Young people, teenagers, please. What is a covenant? What is a covenant? A biblical covenant is a binding relationship established between God and people, sometimes between people, but in here we're talking about between God and people and the husband and wife together, involving specific promises, obligations. Sometimes it's marked by a sign or a ritual. It's beyond a legal requirement. It's more than a contract. That's why we do the ring thing. It's a symbol of sharing and giving. There's all kinds of covenants throughout the Bible, and we can look at this at a later time. But then Jesus goes on and says this whole thing of a certificate of divorce, verse 31 and 32. But I say, whoever divorces his wife by any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. Now, we'll get into that more when we look at our summer time, looking at divorce in particular. But in the Bible, everything has a context. When Moses was dealing with this of divorce in the book of Deuteronomy, the problem was that divorce was becoming rampant. As a matter of fact, there's a bit here that talks about that the husband in the Old Testament law is not pleased with his wife. Then there's some that would take that application, well, if she doesn't cook well, then I'm going to divorce her. If she doesn't please me in this other way, I'm going to divorce her. If she doesn't look like what she looked like when I married her, then I'm going to divorce her. It became a major, major problem. But in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus said God's plan from the beginning was never divorce, but because of the hardness of your heart. So now, I know we had very little time with that. We had very little time. But we want to just set the tone. We want to make you aware of two things. When Jesus talked about adultery, do I guard? Do I guard? And I'll use the word guard. Do I guard my heart and my eyes? The two are very connected. Okay? For women, and especially the men, guard your eyes. Guard your heart. And if that starts to creep and go in the direction that is not good, please speak to someone. Please look into this bit of software. It's becoming a problem. If you're married, do you see your marriage as a covenant as God sees it? Okay? You may say, Eric, I'm divorced, and what do we do? Now, hold on now. Okay. Don't get upset. We will look into that later. We'll look into that later. But in general, God has designed the marriage relationship to be a lifelong relationship. Okay? There are situations that happen. I fully appreciate that. Okay? And we'll come to that. But I want you to bear in mind, particularly for our young people, think of marriage as a very serious, very thoughtfully bringing others involved to look at this particular situation. Because, as I said before, your parents will see things that you don't see. There's an old phrase that says, love is blind. You ever heard that one before?